And now we move to the discussion of Hurricane Ian, which, as you all know, hit the state of Florida just hours ago and is now working its way across the state and heading for more U.S. states. We wanted to learn about what this hurricane is doing to the population there, why people were so concerned about it, and what is causing these hurricanes to happen apparently more frequently and perhaps more severely. To discuss these and other issues, we're very happy to welcome our guest for today's program, distinguished professor, educator, expert, Mr. Hugh Willoughby. Mr. Willoughby is the Distinguished Research Professor at the Department of Earth and Environment at the Institute of Environment, Florida International University. He studies tropical cyclone structure, intensity, and impacts. He has flown more than 400 missions into the eyes of hurricanes. I said that correctly, 400 missions into the eyes of hurricanes, and is here to live to tell us about it. And typhoons as a meteorologist for the federal government. Mr. Willoughby was a research meteorologist at the Hurricane Research Division of NOAA's Atlantic Oceanographic and Meteorological Laboratory, and he's done other amazing work that is going to be of great expertise and help to us during our conversation today. Professor Willoughby, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Very happy to have you. So first, I just introduced a bit about your work, and I'm sure there's so much more to it, but can you tell us what made you interested in this field and what possessed you to go flying into the eyes of hurricanes, and tell us about that experience?
Well, the real story is I was in the Navy at the Naval Postgraduate School when Hurricane Camille happened. And they were looking for people with more education than judgment. And I fit the bill, so I volunteered. And the next thing I knew, I was flying into typhoons. And then after I got out of the Navy, I came to the University of Miami and to politic for a flying job with NOAA. And I did that for 27 years. And Richard Bach, the author of the Jonathan Livingston Seagull, once said, there's nothing inherently dangerous about flying. It's when you stop flying that bad things happen to you. And my experience of life has said that that's true.
That's beautiful. So, Professor, tell us about what is going on with Hurricane Ian. You have literally seen many hurricanes and typhoons. What was so concerning about this particular hurricane? Why did people so worried? Just tell us about it.
Well, really, the beginning is in geology. The state of Florida is a platform of limestone, and it's tipped down very slightly to the west, which means that there's deep water off the east coast and a large expanse of shallow water off the west coast. And in addition, there's a warm ocean current that flows. It flows like a hairpin turn, the water that will become the Gulf Stream. And so we've got intensity, and the stress of the wind acts at the surface, but if it's spread through a shallow depth, you get more storm surge and less depth. And so we've got high surge, low topographic relief on land, and potential for a lot of intensity. And they all came together in Ian. It's not quite the worst case, but it sure is a pretty bad case.
Understood. So now that you're seeing some of the devastation, the impact, what's happening on the ground? It sounds like maybe it was not as bad as it could have been, perhaps. But tell us, what are you thinking about what's happening on the ground?
Well, there's a lot of property damage. And there are three damaging weather elements. Wind is what everybody thinks of, but storm surge, salt water from the ocean, and fresh water from the rainfall, actually those three elements account about equally, but it's moving water that kills people. Few people die from the wind, but most of them drown. And the concern is, did people get out before the surge came in? And I'm hopeful that the emergency managers did a good job and people here listen to their advice, and the loss of life will be small, but it'll be good to know one way or the other. But the property damage is probably going to be horrendous. I would guess at $100 billion. Again, I hope I'm wrong, but that's what it looks like.
Gotcha. Now, Professor, tell us this, is this normal? Obviously, hurricanes happen every year, and that's been the case for, I assume, most of history. But are we seeing any increase in the number of hurricanes that are hitting states like Florida and any increase in their severity? Or is this just tradition?
Well, if you look at the last now 6 years, starting in 2017 through this year, there's been something memorable in the Atlantic Basin, either in the U.S. or on the adjacent islands every year. That is unusual. What we have is normally, through my experience and before, we'll have two seasons that are bad, and then go back to, maybe one or two memorable storms, and then a long time between, and then another one or two. But we've got 5 years with a major hurricane landfall and expensive landfall. Now, not all in the U.S. There was Hurricane Dorian in the Bahamas, and Hurricane Maria, which is U.S. territory, but not the continental U.S. where we have good statistics. But I think the argument can be made that it's global warming. And if we look at the history since 1900, where we have not good but acceptable statistics, we get 1% of increase. 1% hurricane damage increases 1% a year, but that doesn't sound like much. But 1% a year over 122 years works out to a factor of 3. That's corrected for inflation and all sorts of other economic factors. So you can make a case now that we're seeing the effect of global warming. And of course, there are other phenomena, droughts, floods, paradoxically, wildfires worldwide. So it's happening.
Gotcha. So what can people do to prepare for this sort of thing? Is that, barring some radical change in our government's policy and the governments around the world able to reverse what's happening with climate change in the short term, is there anything that states can do to prepare better for hurricanes like this? Or is it just batten down the hatches and get out of Dodge and hope? Or is there something else that can be done in the short term?
Well, we can build for the wind and avoid the immediate coastal area. I think the idea of, for instance, you have the hotels built on the beach. Instead of building them on the beach, build them the other side of the strip that goes along the beach and have a maintained dune line on the beach. But if the sea rises as much as it could in the next 100 or 200 years, a lot of coastal real estate is going to be underwater.
Well,
normally underwater.
Yeah, that's disturbing to think about. Now, Professor, the aftermath of a hurricane, right? When it's all over, what kind of damage do we usually see? You mentioned the property damage. Obviously loss of life, and you estimate your fear is that this could be, up to $100 billion in damage. How long does it take to recover from something like this? And what goes into that in terms of federal state partnership and that sort of thing?
Well, my wife and I were my family went through Andrew. We had a daughter who was 6 months old.
Wow.
My wife had just had major surgery.
Wow.
And it was for us, and our house was damaged, but not blown off the roof. And I'd done this for a living for a while, so I knew what to do in the aftermath. And we came back to more or less the same as we were before in 6 months. There were people that it took, there were people who left, people that We knew there were people that it took a year or two. I think the damage from Ian is going to be more extensive. It'll probably be spread over a bigger area. And the people whose houses are lightly damaged will be able to come back fairly quickly. Others a year or, well, 6 months to a year. And, like has happened in South Dade in Homestead, they never came back. The air base closed. It was devastating to the economy. It was 5 years. Well, some of it hasn't recovered even to this day. It's not the same as it was.
It's just fascinating to think about the long-term effects of a hurricane. We think about the immediate stuff, but you have to stop and think about the long-term effect that this has. So, Professor Willoughby, final thoughts as we close here. The hurricane, I understand, is now moving potentially along the eastern seaboard of the United States, heading towards perhaps South Carolina. Can you tell us where it looks like it's going, what we might be seeing next?
Well, you're right. It's headed for South Carolina. The question is, how strong is it going to be? But probably the big source of damage in the Carolinas, it'll probably be no more than a Category 2. And then when it comes on shore in the Carolinas, it'll be mainly a rain event. And that's not to diminish the damage potential. But the Carolinas and the out to Cape Hatteras, they get about as many hurricanes as South Florida, but they're weaker, so that moving water is really the damaging weather element, whether fresh water inland or the storm surge.
Gotcha. Professor Willoughby, I know I said last question, but I have to ask you one more. I think my viewers will be upset, which is your experience flying over typhoons and hurricanes. Can you just give us a little taste of what that was like, the experience of it, the preparation for it? Just give us a little insight into what that's like, because most of us will never experience that in our life, and we don't want to. Tell us a bit about your memories.
The thing about it is the flight crews, I was a scientist, I'm not a pilot. And the flight crews are very experienced, and they're very professional. They know what to expect. And, it's not a usual thing to be doing with an airplane, but I don't know anybody that's been killed doing it. There were people that were killed, but I used to come out to the Hurricane Center is here on our campus, and the lab where I worked was on Virginia Key, and I'd travel between them. I'd go out here to get a briefing, and then go out to talk to the people that my people that would fly with me, and then we'd go to the airport. And the most dangerous part of my day was merging onto I-95 to go to the lab. And I actually felt that it sounds like hyperbole, but it was the truth. Because I do know people that have been killed on I-95.
Yeah, as someone who's driven in that area, yes, I absolutely know what you mean. Good. Well, that's a fascinating experience that you have there, Professor, and we look forward to hearing more about it in the future, God willing. Thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it. Thank you for your insight. And again, we hope we'll get some positive news that the community will rebuild as quickly as possible, that there hopefully will not be any further loss of life that we don't know about yet, and that those in South Carolina and elsewhere will be safe as well. But thank you, Professor Willoughby, for joining us and discussing this issue with us. We look forward to having you back in the future, God willing.
Thank you.
Thank you.